Hi, this is Scott Allen, and this module is an introduction to cascading style sheets. In the mid-90s, when the web first entered the mainstream, websites and web browsers were relatively simple. Web pages consisted mostly of text and hyperlinks. Colors were generally solid and images were rare. Most design was done using simple tabular layouts. Fast forward to today, and we've been working with cascading style sheets for over a decade. CSS is the technology that allows us to create beautiful, maintainable, and flexible website designs. And in this module, we'll learn the basic principles behind CSS. We're going to look at how to add styles to a web page and talk about fundamental principles like selectors, rules, and units of measurement. This is the first module in a series of modules that will give you everything you need to know about styles for modern websites. CSS is a language you can use to control the formatting, presentation, and overall look of a web page, so things like colors, layouts, and fonts. To get an idea of how CSS works and why CSS exists, let's look at some HTML markup that is not using CSS. The markup you see here is displaying a short quote from a fantasy book I enjoyed recently. The HTML contains not only the content, which is things like the quote, the author's name, and the name of the book, but also presentation instructions, stuff like the background color for the page and a font size. This approach can work, as you can see in the output, but mixing content and presentation makes things difficult. Every time I create a new page, I have to remember to set the background color if I want any consistency across a website. And if I want to add additional quotes to the page, I have to remember to set the font size again. Imagine in 6 months if I wanted to redesign a website with a fresh new look, or even just make simple changes like using a different font size for all the quotes or a different background color. I'd have to go through all of the HTML and change these color and font settings everywhere. CSS will allow me to remove all the presentation information from the HTML and leave behind only the content. That makes the HTML easier to maintain because it is only focused on content, but it also makes it easier to change and experiment with different designs. All of the presentation instructions will be in an external style sheet. It's a best practice to use CSS to manage all the presentation aspects of a website, so let's look at a demo to see how it works. Here on the file system, I have an HTML file that contains the markup we saw in this slide earlier. Only this markup doesn't contain any presentation information, so the page renders in a rather plain fashion, just black text on a white background. What I'd like to do is add some color to this page. And one way to do that would be to go into the head tag of this page and add a style definition inside of a style tag. This style type is text/CSS, and it has inside of it a style rule. We'll be talking about rules later in this module, but this rule tells the browser go out and find the body element and set its background color to blanched almond. If we save that file and refresh the browser, we can see that change has taken effect. Now, this approach to adding styles to a web page is effective somewhat in separating the presentation rules from your content, because now at least all the presentation rules are in one place. And what we'll see as we go through this module is that you can use these style rules to influence different elements in a page. So we could also change the paragraph tag and so forth that's in this page. But it does miss one of the advantages of using a true external cascading style sheet file, and that is being able to reuse these style rules throughout a website. So I'm not going to take this approach. I'm going to remove this style, and instead I'm going to open up a .css file. This is the common extension for a cascading style sheet. We're just going to open it in Notepad++, which is a text editor, because CSS files are just text files. Inside the style sheet, I'm going to put the same style that we had earlier, which is going to tell the browser to set the background color of the body to a specific color. But the way things are set up right now, this isn't going to work simply because the page that is loaded doesn't know anything about this style sheet. What I also need to do is come into the HTML page and provide a link that will point the browser to pick up this style sheet. That's done using a link tag. The rel attribute specifies the relationship between this document and the link. We're telling the browser that this is a style sheet for the current document. The place to go get it is in the same relative place. Just look for something called stylesheet.css. But of course, you can specify an entire HTTP address here. and the MIME type of this document is going to be text/CSS. So with that link in place and a style defined inside of our style sheet, what we can now do is have all of our presentation information defined in a separate file, a CSS file, and we also can include that CSS file in as many web pages as we want. We can also put our styles across many different CSS files and have multiple links in here to pull in different style sheets from different locations. Since this web page is relatively simple, we're going to stick with one style sheet because we can define multiple style rules inside of the style sheet. For instance, we could also add a rule that says for all paragraph tags, the font size for these paragraph tags should be larger than normal. Let's save that and watch the text carefully. As I refresh, it becomes a little bit larger. So these are two quick and simple demonstrations of what you can do inside an external style sheet with style rules and styles, and how you can influence the presentation of your content just using these style rules. And now that we know a little bit about how CSS works, let's dive into some specifics. The CSS features we are going to look at are all backed by specifications maintained by the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C. You can read the specifications and the latest CSS news at the w3.org website. It's important to understand a little bit about these specifications because they do evolve, and one of the unfortunate characteristics of CSS is that you'll find varying support among the different browsers. We'll talk about some of those scenarios throughout the course. CSS was first introduced in 1996 with the CSS1 specification, but it took 3 to 4 years for browsers to provide reasonable implementations of that first spec. These days, most modern browsers provide pretty good support for CSS 2.1, which started gaining traction around 2004. There is also some support for some of the nearly complete features of CSS 3. That's still a work in progress, but pieces of the specification are relatively stable, and some of the latest browsers like IE9 have already implemented those pieces. Most of this course will be using features defined in CSS 2.1, but we can take a peek at some of the CSS 3 features too. If you're wondering if a particular CSS feature is supported in any given browser, you can visit quirksmode.org. This site provides a table allowing you to cross-reference specific CSS features against different versions of IE, Chrome, Safari, Opera, and Firefox. This table will tell you if a given specification or piece of the specification is implemented by any particular browser.